where heads of state, sports, entertainment, and political celebrities meet. You're listening to Armstrong Williams.
And our very special guest, David J. Bobb. Listen, I am not apologetic to talk about being a person of faith. And, you know, and Renee and Charlton and Alex and Anthony and David and our listeners, we all have gone through our valley experience. So, some of us don't have to live it out in the public sphere. And I'll never forget when I went through No Child Left Behind in 2005. And, you know, to me, those were very dark days. Listen, I remember when my mentor called me and said that a friend called him laughing and said that I would be a footnote in media and never to be heard from again.
Ouch.
And it was just, and the people you think that are your allies, they abandon you. And this went on. It went on, and it went on. And you just feel alone. And I will never forget this about, you know, you continue to build, but obviously you know something has died inside of you. No matter how much you try to pretend that you're okay, you know you're not okay. Everything is not okay. And I'll never forget, I was call us we see you, and one morning, early one morning, I'll never forget this. I woke up and I was thinking, and I was afraid to ask the Lord whether it was over. Because see,
you just said, is it over?
Wait a minute. So sometimes people think that you're being punished for what they read about in the paper, but you know there are other things you're doing that nobody else knows about, but you and who you're doing it with, that you're being punished for. So you have this wrestling match with the Lord. So Lord, I know they think it's this, but I'm sure you'll punish me for something else. So I was having this conversation with the Lord. You know, you understand what I'm talking about. But anyhow, I said, well, I guess I need to ask this question, because sometimes I don't even ask. I don't want the Lord to tell me. I just try to stay in the now. But I asked this question. I said, you know, I think I've learned. I know I got to pay the price. And without hesitation, a light came through my skylight.
Really?
Absolute, Lord is my witness. And a light came through it, the light. And I don't know, it's no voice. A peace came over me that was so unbelievable. I didn't realize what, but it was there. And when I got to the office, Nancy said, you know, the New York Times is on the line. They want to write an article about you because they feel that you've been punished enough, and they want to write about your coming back. They want to know what you're up to now. And sure enough, the New York Times wrote a big piece about me.
A positive piece.
Very unbelievable positive. Unbelievable. And from that day, I never looked back.
Wow.
So the thing is that you got to make peace with God, not with man.
For redemption.
Yes, for redemption. And that's, you may call that humility, but it was my valley experience. But I had to work that out, not with the people who were criticizing me. No. I had to work it out with my creator. And you know what? I said to the Lord, I said, you know what? I deserve to be punished. I know I do. And we know the truth. I said, it's okay. I deserve it. That's why I was never upset. That's why I always apologize. I never blame anyone. But I never could imagine that I would have had these kind of blessings years later. But it goes to show you, no matter what you do in life, no matter how bad it is, God is always in control. And he forgives. And he alone can forgive and restore you greater than you ever been before.
That's powerful. I think of the example of Frederick Douglass, who knew nothing in his early life except abject humiliation. And what he had to do was come to this place in his own understanding of faith and religion, because everything that had been done to him was done in the name of God. All of that enslavement, all of that subjugation, the fact that he had been sent out, having learned to read, his slave master said, look, teaching him more about reading is going to unfit him for freedom. And he said, well, I want to be unfit then. And just at that moment, he was sent out only to be broken by one of the really terrible slave breakers on the eastern shore of Maryland. And he came to this place where he recognized that he could either continue to blame God and accept the narrative that had been imposed upon him, that this kind of thing was done in the name of God, or he could throw that off and say, you know what? This is not the message of the Bible. This is not the promise that's there. And he came to a kind of moral and spiritual conversion. And with that intellectual awakening, that moral and spiritual conversion, then he was ready to resist. and he resisted that man. He could have destroyed that guy. The guy tried to call everybody else to his aid. Nobody came. But what he did after that day, after that point of physical resistance, that slave breaker never touched Frederick Douglass again. 6 months later, he was able to escape, win his liberty, and become one of the greatest Americans.
Wow.
David, what drew you to the topic of humility?
How much lip service politicians pay it, and how little practice there is.
Ha. Yeah.
Let's go to Sam in Atlanta. Sam, thank you for calling. You're on with David J. Bobb and humility.
Hi, to each of you. I think what it really means to me, Armstrong, is when you can, when the Bible says, honor thy father and mother, that your days be longer, this and that. I look at that mother and father is literally authority, and that could be anybody. So, say like when we, in these particular days and times, when we don't respect authority, for one, like our president, no matter what happened or whatever, he's still our president, and we should respect him as that. And, just when you say, you honor your father and your mother, I mean, look how blessed you're being just because you did that, because you said, you know what, although I don't like what my mom or dad may have said to me or whatever or did, I'm going to honor them because it's what the word says. Do you understand what I'm
Oh, yeah. I understand. Sam.
But another thing I think what it is, too, is when you can deal with people that have upset you or did something to you, and you can just give them love, and you can turn the other cheek, and then I'm not going to respond the way you did me or whatever.
Absolutely.
I'm going to give you love in spite of.
Yes.
Now I'll let you guys. I'm a truck driver, so let me hear what you got to say offline.
Thank you, Sam. And also speak to the fact of what he's saying. I think the hardest thing for us as human beings is to be honest with ourselves, because we think we can lie and manipulate, but it's so hard to be naked and to be honest. It's so hard when we do wrong. It's so easy to blame someone else because we are so afraid of how others are going to look upon us. We're so afraid of shame. But you know what? We're human. We're imperfect. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to do dumb things. We're going to give into the flesh.
Lay it all to bear.
But that's not the final chapter of your life.
That's right. I think the caller's question and comments about honoring your father and mother call to mind the example of Abigail Adams. Early on in her courtship with John, who was, even as a young man, very much aware of how vain, arrogant, even contemptuous of authority he was, he wrote her a letter, and he said, "You're going to have to be, in so many words, humble for me if we come together in marriage." And she wrote him back, and she said, "Not so fast. That's not the way it really works. You have to come in being honest with yourself to a realization of your own fallibility, and then, and this is the really important point, change. You can't have other people change for you."
Talk about James Madison.
James Madison, as a young man, was somebody who showed flashes of brilliance. He went off to college, did it in half the time, finished up at Princeton, went back like a number of our young people do today. He was pulled into back to where he grew up, and his job was to teach his younger siblings. He wasn't very happy with the way his future looked. He didn't really see a promising future. And he had to figure out what in the world he was going to do. He was a hypochondriac. He was of sickly constitution. He didn't weigh 100 pounds soaking wet. He was a wimp. And what he had to do is figure out what was going to provide a purpose in his life. And what he saw in a neighboring county in Virginia, Culpeper, were people who were persecuted based upon their religious beliefs. There was an established religion, and the Anglicans held all the cards. And what he resolved to do in his young life, and what he did throughout his career then, was fight on behalf of those who were oppressed. And he became one of those who was really, truly powerful on behalf of those who lacked a voice. So a guy who you could barely speak, who you could barely hear when he spoke, became one of those who had the greatest voices for those who were truly put down.
what about in our everyday life? I know one of the things that it seemed to be so difficult for many people is just apologizing, just saying, I was wrong and I'm sorry and I messed up. There's a certain, resistance to expressing humility and saying, I made a mistake. I hurt you. I'm sorry. Why is that so difficult?
I think it goes back to that point of honesty. To admit that bespeaks some sort of brokenness almost. I mean, look at the way that this Toronto mayor is twisting and turning every which way.
He's saying that he admitted he did crack.
Yeah, but he's not responsible because he did it in a drunken stupor.
Right, so there's always an excuse. There's always a thing.
Fault. I
mean, when I see my 2 and 4-year-old, when they have a fight, they're boys and they're prone to that, and it's sometimes an apology has to be issued. The real question then is there going to be a change? And that comes with a forgiveness, right? That turning away from your sin, turning away from the thing that you did wrong. So a person doesn't want to say they're sorry because they're going to have to give up that which they're doing. And very often, as Augustine knew, there's a lot of pleasure in the things that are wrong. And so turning away from those things is hard.
Talk about one of my favorite chapters in your book was Jesus and Socrates.
Benjamin Franklin said early in his life, it was in his 20s, and he looked out, saw disorder. He wasn't being as frugal. He wanted to be a much better man. And so he set out on a plan of what he called moral perfection. He made a list of 12 virtues he was going to work hard on. Then he came to a buddy of his who happened to be a Quaker and said, look at my list. Do you think I should add anything? The Quaker said, yes, you should add humility. You're kind of an arrogant guy. You correct people too quickly. You jump in. You don't let them complete a thought. You're a know-it-all. And so Franklin, to his credit, said, all right, I'm going to take on that challenge. And what I'm going to try to do in humility is imitate Jesus and Socrates. And so Franklin tried to be a better listener. He tried to be more aware of his fallibility. And, in the latter part of his career, on the last day of the Constitutional Convention, he stood up and he gave a really amazing speech. And he said, a lot of us here, after these 4 long months of deliberations, we can find things in this Constitution that we don't agree with. It's not a perfect document. But let us, for the sake of recognizing our own fallibility, come to agreement, come to a kind of compromise here, recognizing we can't compromise away our principles, but we can recognize that none of us is perfect, and let us forge ahead as a country. So he came to recognize that humility is something never mastered. He joked that if he should ever become humble, he would become proud of that thing. But nonetheless, the task is really important.
Yeah, the task of becoming humble, I feel like it's something that it is an internal battle, but again, I do think it does take a situation to truly test how humble you really are. I was just sitting here thinking, I know we have historic context and characters that we're using, but I can't help but think about Floyd Mayweather. And he is seen as the most arrogant athlete on the planet. Mm-hmm. But we had the pleasure of meeting him, and that's his facade for boxing. In the context of his sport, like we were saying before, there's a time and a place for everything. There is no place for humility in the boxing ring. And, I mean, I guess in terms of the actual sparring of it, but in terms of the psyching up of the opponent, the mental edge is completely dependent on your being able to scare them before you even get in the ring. So when I sit here and I think about this, I would just hear how he is humbled in the fact that he understands he's a great, but in the grand scale of boxing, he is a mere student. And so I kind of wonder what your perception is on someone like a Floyd Mayweather, who does provide an ethos of arrogance, but his true nature is one. He's a giving person. He takes care of his people. He is humble enough to have a conversation with you and I. So what is your take on situations like that?
That's interesting. For the ancients and a thinker like Aristotle.
And our phone lines are open, 1-866-801-8255. We're so locked into this conversation. It's necessary. It's necessary. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Aristotle had a virtue that he called magnanimity, and that was greatness of soul, where you are great and you recognize yourself as properly great. Now, that doesn't sound very humble at all. And in fact, for Aristotle, there wasn't a lot of room, just like there isn't for a prize fighter who has to put on that braggadocio, right? I mean, you can't show that you can't let your guard down.
No weakness.
No weakness, that's right. And I think no pain, no gain. There's a way in which that Aristotelian mentality would kind of give the impression that you're self-made, that you don't need anybody else, right? And if you're out there alone in that ring, that's the kind of thing that you might have to put on a little bit. So that kind of reminds me of that. The question then is, can you combine that attitude with a real humility at heart? And I think it is possible.
What about this?
Doesn't it go back to Armstorng, your comment about separating the script from the person? If you're a boxer and you have to be scary and big and win by intimidation, that's the script. But then you leave the ring and you are the person that you are, and you know who you are, and you know how you measure up.
What I was going to mention, Renee, is this football player who's been bullied. Okay, this is a 310-pound, 6'5" professional NFL football player who was bullied to the point that he had to leave the locker room, right? I mean, he left the team. So he's gone. I mean, so the bullying is kind of in a way, I think, tied in with this whole humility thing. Because this guy, bullying doesn't stop when people turn 15. It goes on through life. There's people who are bullied every day at work. They don't like what they have to do.
But that's not a situation, in my opinion,
of humility.
That the NFL, law enforcement, the government, anybody else needs to work out. That's something that he, as a grown man,
has to
work out on his own with the person that's bullying him. I'm sorry.
He's not being humble.
He allowed this. Only he can change it, because he may run away with it from there, but he will confront it again until he confronts it and deals with it. That's what men must do in life sometimes.
But he's a tough football player.
There's a level the only reason I have to disagree because there's a level of threat in his situation, and you don't want to embrace threat with having to prove yourself at that point. You're an NFL.
What do you mean by threat?
The guy left voice messages, and the last thing he said is, "I'll kill you."
Then come kill me.
Come on, in the locker room.
Come on and kill me, okay?
You guys remember what the locker room was?
And when you have guys
grade?
like Hernandez, that's not far-fetched.
I mean, he's 6'5" and 310 now. This isn't some little wimp.
Listen, I'm sorry, but listen, I think Charlton. I want to come back to this. The phone lines are open, 1-866-801-8255. I want to come back to something that Charlton mentioned, because when he was mentioning Floyd Mayweather, I actually think that's something that people forget, Renee and David, is that humility in business and negotiations, in war, in strife, and conflict is a great weapon. It really is. And where you may see that you cannot bring humility in the ring, sometimes it is humility that can put you on the pathway to victory when you're about to lose what appears to be the fight. And I think sometimes, for me, I know from experience, sometimes I think I have to be argue hard, be a jerk, no compromise. But when I find myself on one of those days, and I think life teaches us about those days, where I say, no, I say, you know what? You tell me what you think is fair. I believe you to be an honorable man. So you tell me what you think is fair. I don't have to negotiate. And what I find is the greatest contract that I've ever signed. Humility, it's not a weakness. To me, it's never a weakness. Bullying, what you're discovering, is not humility. That guy needs his butt beat. Seriously, that's what he needs. He needs his butt beat. I'm sorry, that's different. We're gonna take a break.
He's a grown man.
No, the one that's bullying, somebody needs to teach him a lesson. That's what he needs. He's not a bully. He was a coward. We'll be back. Don't go away. We'll be back. Are you kidding me? We call us, we see it. Oh no, I kick his butt.